And now, the final 5 movies on my top 12 comic book hero movies of all time. Number 5, X-Men Days of Future Past. For me personally, the success of the first 2 X-Men films and X-Men First Class helped cement the legacy of the X-Men on the big screen. From their decade spent on the pages of Marvel Comics to the highly successful and popular 92 animated show, alongside SpiderMan, the X-Men were firmly established as Marvel's A-listers. The movie takes place in a dystopian 2023. Sentinels are hunting and killing mutants and humans who possess the genetic potential to have mutant offspring. Charles Xavier explains that the Sentinels were originally designed by Bolivar Trask, a weapons designer whom Raven Darkholme killed in 1973. In response, the government captured Raven and experimented on her and used her DNA to create Sentinels capable of adapting to any mutant power. Xavier plans to travel back in time and prevent Trask's assassination. Wolverine offers to go back in time as Xavier would die if he attempted to time travel. Wolverine is now in 1973, but he must try to convince a young and broken Charles Xavier of his destiny as leader of the X-Men. After communicating with his future self, Xavier teams with Wolverine and Hank McCoy to stop Raven, aka Mystique, from assassinating Trask. In a final battle, the X-Men have to take on a horde of Sentinels. Xavier must also convince Raven not to murder Trask. This movie was almost the best of, as it featured nearly every major X-Men character to feature in the franchise up until this point. The tone was one of both impending doom, but great hope and excitement. Hugh Jackman, as always, is fantastic as Wolverine. Watching both James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart interact as Charles Xavier was really cool to see. Michael Fassbender at this point had firmly established himself as the successor to Ian McKellen as Magneto. The whole movie overall is my favourite in the X-Men film franchise, sitting at number 5 on my list. Number 4, Captain America Civil War. This movie should basically have been called Avengers 3 Civil War, as it features all but 2 of the original Avengers. Hulk and Thor miss out this time as they were duking it out in Thor Ragnarok. We have seen from the last 2 Avengers movies that Steve and Tony did not always get along, and they even got into a fight in Age of Ultron. Here, it gets 10 times worse. 4 of the Avengers are in Lagos, Nigeria, attempting to stop Brock Romolo from stealing a biological weapon. In the whole scurry, he blows himself up and the resulting blast kills several Wakandan humanitarian workers. As a result, the US Secretary of State, Thaddeus Ross, prepares the Sokovia Accords, which is basically documentation that will govern how the Avengers use their powers. This divides the team, with Tony all for it, and Steve completely against it. The course of the movie sees a number of events occur which divide the Avengers further and further, with villain Hans Zemo the master manipulator. Black Panther makes his big on-screen debut, and the death of his father T'Chaka sees him go after the man responsible, Bucky Barnes aka the Winter Soldier. Due to his unwavering loyalty and friendship, Steve wants to bring Bucky in himself, and that leads to a clash with both Black Panther and the authorities. The Avengers come to a head with both Steve and Tony leading factions that lead to a massive battle. A certain web slinger makes his debut in the MCU, and he is on Team Stark. Ant-Man also makes his big team-up appearance in this movie. And as fierce as this battle is, it's the final showdown where we get the complete devastating fallout. Tony has discovered that Barnes was indeed set up by Zemo, and he comes to Steve and calls a truce. However, that truce is soon broken when Zemo shows footage of the murder of Tony's parents by a brainwashed Barnes as the Winter Soldier. Even worse for Tony is that he learns that Steve knew about the whole thing and never told him. This leads to a final fight between Iron Man against both Cap and Winter Soldier, which is very emotional and hard-hitting. The results see Bucky lose his cyber arm, and Stark's suit get disabled, and Cap walking away and giving up the shield, leaving the Avengers completely broken and divided. The movie was just excellent given all the conflict and moral dilemmas the Avengers had to deal with. The brilliant manipulation of the villain Nemo systematically tearing the team apart was masterclass. Tony almost got depicted at one point as the villain the way the events unfolded. From a psychological standpoint, this is probably the best acted movie involving the Avengers. An overall brilliant comic book hero movie adapted brilliantly from the very popular comic series. Number 3. The Avengers. The movie that set the tone. The movie that was the culmination of almost up until that point 4 years of world building, with the first set of movies involving Cap, Hulk, Iron Man and Thor. It had been the long-term vision of Kevin Feige to bring together Marvel's B-listers and turn them into household names on the big screen. Lo and behold, May 4th, 2012, The Avengers was released to audiences first in the US and then the rest of the world to mass critical acclaim and financial success, raking in over $1.5 billion in the box office and receiving rave reviews left, right and centre from fans and journalists alike. The MCU had firmly established itself as a leading brand for comic superhero movies, and the team finally managed to come together, leading to what has become an iconic moment in movie history, the official formation of the Avengers. A massive battle ensues and the heroes triumph over Loki and his forces. Despite the amazing 2.5-hour plus journey of this movie, it was really only the beginning, as the ending set up what would be later known as the Infinity Saga, the ultimate main villain at the forefront, the villain known as Thanos. It cannot be said how pivotal the success of this movie was, first establishing what was essentially Marvel's B-listers and bringing them all together in a big ensemble with an excellent build-up of stories in the previous movies before this, and culminating in an excellent hero team-up movie. The witty dialogue, trademark Marvel humor, visual effects, great action scenes and sequences, cool-looking costumes. This was a comic book come to life. An amazing ensemble movie that brought together a group of heroes who go on to establish a universe full of great characters and interesting storylines. Number 2. Spider-Man. Spider-Man is ingrained in pop culture consciousness, and ever since his debut on the comic pages of Amazing Fantasy issue 15 in August of 1962, Spidey has been firmly established as one, if not the, most popular superheroes of all time. His animated shows from the 60s, 80s and 90s, as well as a questionable 70s TV show. On top of all his comic book appearances, Spider-Man was an established pop culture icon. All that was missing was a movie. Enter Sam Raimi, who was tasked with bringing the web slinger onto the big screen. On May 3rd, 2002, Spider-Man was released to the US and then the rest of the world, and it was lauded as a commercial and critical success. It was an origin story that largely stuck to the comic book roots on how Spider-Man came to be. Spider-Man for the most part stuck to the comics. Peter was a shy and awkward nerdy teenager, played brilliantly by Tobey Maguire. He was bullied and he was not a hit with the girls. He is then bitten by a radioactive spider, which gives him superpowers and sees him transform into Spider-Man. Then that famous line was echoed,
"Remember, with great power comes great responsibility."
With that, he goes on to become Spider-Man. So that origin, which is canon in the comic books, is brilliantly replicated here. One major difference is the way Spider-Man shoots his webs. Instead of having web shooters, he has webs which organically come out of his hands. Personally, I actually like this change. The movie does well to depict the vision Stan Lee had for Spider-Man. Just because he has superpowers does not mean things get better for him. In fact, they get worse. He ends up leading a double life, struggling to get a job and pay the bills on time, relationship woes with his love interest Mary Jane. The film does a brilliant job of depicting that world, and you really do feel for Peter, and in some cases you can even relate to his struggles. It is what has made Spider-Man one of the most endearing superheroes of all time. The film grossed over $825 million at the box office. Spider-Man was a hit, becoming the first film to gross over $110 million in a single weekend, as well as setting a record for fastest grossing movie to reach $100 million in 3 days. The film had an excellent cast as well, with Willem Dafoe being the standout as Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. Harry Connick Jr. compliments Tobey in playing Harry Osborn, Peter's best friend. Rosemary Harris brilliantly depicts Aunt May as we all know her from the comics and some of the earlier animated shows. If ever there was an actor to play a certain role, it was J.K. Simmons, and his portrayal of J. Jonah Jameson is the equivalent of bringing a character off a comic page and bringing him to life. Simply excellent. Overall, Spider-Man 2002 is a brilliant movie with great drama, brilliant acting, tension, intrigue, hard-hitting fight scenes, the blueprint of taking an established comic book character and bringing him on to life. A great film and my second favourite comic book hero movie of all time. Number 1. Avengers Infinity War. The first Avengers movies was a rip-roaring success, and frankly, it seemed an impossible task to surpass it. The follow-up, Age of Ultron, did not fare as well, but still had pretty decent numbers. Infinity War, however, not only surpassed, but created all kinds of box office records, and at one point it was the 4th highest grossing movie of all time. It has since fallen to number 6, but that is still a very impressive statistic. And you could argue the success of this film led to its successor Endgame becoming the 2nd highest grossing movie ever. At one point Endgame was number 1. So had Infinity War not been such a rip-roaring success, Endgame may not have gained from that. Infinity War is an ensemble movie times 10. All the major characters that started the MCU are here, including recent additions in the few years prior to Infinity War, including Doctor Strange, Black Panther, Guardians of the Galaxy and Spider-Man. What is incredible about this movie is that it takes the entire ensemble and divides them into different groups, and each group has their own adventure and character interactions, and it does well to keep the feeling of a shared universe within the confines of a singular movie, with all roads leading to the main protagonist, Thanos. It has a running time of 2.5 hours, and it does not feel like it is dragging. It is very nicely paced, and it does well to fit in several emotions: humor, dread, tragedy, anger, frustration, triumphant return, shock. From the humor between the OG Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy, the impending feel of dread and doom when Thanos first arrives at the beginning of the movie, killing the survivors of Asgard from Thor Ragnarok, and easily beating and dispatching the Hulk, and then killing of Heimdall, as well as the main villain from the first Avengers movie, Loki, with Thor left beaten and hopelessly drifting into space. It firmly establishes Thanos as the ultimate superior villain, and all villains seen prior to him in past movies feel infinitely inferior. There is the tense build-up in Wakanda, with Black Panther and the Wakandan armies joining forces with the Avengers and going into battle against Thanos' order. During the battle, the heroes are greatly overwhelmed by Thanos' armies until Thor re-emerges with his new weapon Stormbreaker and evens out the fight, one of the movie's main standout points. But the biggest shock comes at the end of the movie, with Thanos getting the final stone by ripping it out of Vision and killing him in the process, and gaining full and total control of the Infinity Gauntlet. He finally manages to activate the snap. One by one, everyone turns into dust and fades away. What really adds to this is the lack of background music. It's just an eerie and uncomfortable silence as everyone fades away. Peter's disappearance was really soul-destroying as he appears as a little boy and falls into Tony's arms, pleading, crying not to die, before saying sorry and then vanishing. Now, I went to watch this at the Odeon Theatre in Leicester Square, and the whole experience was like watching a live-action play. When the end happened with everyone snapped, you could hear a pin drop as the audience sat in shock and silence. It's hard to put into words how impactful the final minutes of this movie were. With only the OG Avengers left and in complete ruins, Thanos watches the sunrise on a remote planet in triumph. For the first time in this series, the heroes lost. There are not enough words in the English language to describe just how impactful this film was, to have an ensemble of heroes going up against the forces of evil, which usually sees the heroes triumph, but not here. And just the way it was executed left audiences wanting to know what was next. And of course, this tremendous success paved the way for the follow-up Endgame to go on and break all kinds of box office records. This movie had just about everything from drama to tragedy to humor to action and colourful costumes, and an epic-sized villain, an amazing ensemble of epic proportions, and my all-time favourite hero movie. And that concludes my top 12 comic book heroes of all time. It was so much fun compiling this list and revisiting some of these films that I have not seen for a while. There is no other movie genre quite like superheroes. Escaping into a fantasy world and watching larger-than-life characters that you saw on the small screen in TV shows or read in comic books, and it is such a sight to behold, especially if it is characters that you have invested in and great stories are told. Now, unfortunately, with the recent downward spiral of this great genre, it is unlikely that we will ever get a run of great superhero movies quite like this. The MCU and DC universes are in a horrible predicament right now, with their latest run of movies doing terrible numbers at the box office. James Gunn's recent DC movie universe is beginning to take some shape, with his Superman Legacy movie set to release in 2025. Can it do well? Who knows? Will the MCU ever get back to its past glory? Given the current social landscape, I have very serious doubts. But I am hopeful, so only time will tell. That was my top 12 comic book hero movies of all time, and I am K-Man of Smugface Entertainment. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and if you want to see more, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.